You're listening to the Forest School podcast with Lewis Ames and Gemma Southerden.
It sounds like it's attached to your face.
Oh, right. Lovely. So if I go, it sounds really nice.
It's I think it's because it's obviously getting all the head vibrations as well. I've got a thingy that goes in here, like a gaming one, and it's so horrible because it's across the mouth. We've got that real Xbox sound.
So is that how mine sounds? Shall I try and move it a bit further away from my face, like that? Is that better?
Oh, that is a lot better.
Oh, great. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, easy peasy.
Brill.
Hello.
New headset. I'm a special person in the digital world, in the virtual world, with a special headset.
You've only been locked down for 43 months.
This is true. But do you know what? I've only just remembered that I used to work in a call centre. And so I used to have this on every day.
Whoa, man. What did you do in the call centre? What did you do? Were you selling people shit?
I was not selling people shit. I was trying to get them to do surveys. One of them was like, hello, I'm sorry to disturb you. My name is Gemma. I'm working for a company called Envoy. And
I'm in the bath right now. If you could call me.
Okay, well, just to pause you there a second. The survey this discussion will only take about 5 minutes, and we'd really like to get your opinion on some food. And what would you associate with the Jolly Green Giant? What comes to mind when I say Jolly Green Giant?
Ask her, are we doing this?
Yeah.
Oh, peas.
Okay,
peas, isn't it? But it's not. It's sweet corn. I've just realised that as I said it.
That's fine. Peas is fine. However, whatever the question means to you, however you interpret the question. And you know, once I had to do it. Once I had to do it for a council in London, and that was the client, and I had loads of questions I had to ask the local residents, and it was like, would you say in the last 12 months, car crime has increased, decreased, or stayed about the same? Or I don't know. And like car crime, theft, kind of. And one of the questions was, would you say that homophobic crime has gone up, gone down, stayed about the same? And so this guy was like, homophobic crime, what's that? And you can't explain it to them because then it will skew the survey results.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he then took the wrong meaning of what that was and was like, oh, no. Oh, that's increased. There's loads of them now. I was like, oh, no. Well, I have to put in what you say. I have to say, he said that it's increased because there's loads of them now. Oh, my heart sank.
Amazing.
So, yeah, lots of people like that.
Wow.
There we go. That was the job.
But you've got a better job now.
Yeah.
Just about.
Yeah.
I did say, didn't I? I put in a thing that I was reflecting back on the podcast and thinking that it could have very easily ended up with like, here's the best way to tie a hammock, or like, let's talk about where we get our waterproofs from. And I'm actually quite pleased that we've ended up with this surprisingly meaty podcast about like child development and grief and all kinds of heavy stuff, but that's all important. I was thinking the other day, because we've just put this FSA video out, and it's Matt talking about it being holistic, and I really think there's something in there that's like, if the kids want or need to know about castles, then castles is Forest School. If the kids want or need to know about spaceships, then spaceships is Forest School. Like there's something in there, isn't there, that just like, I find it interesting that like our CPD does end up narrowing down to that bushcraft thing, but it would be equally valid to be like, actually, I'm going to do a course on medieval masonry because there's a chance that how many of them want to build castles, and make dens, or we've got a group, a WhatsApp group, haven't we, for our one of the groups that isn't running at the moment, and we were asking them for ideas for a new treehouse, and they came up with like, they wanted murder holes and they wanted a trebuchet. A 5-year-old said, please could we have a trebuchet in the treehouse? And I was like, well, one, what other group of children would you get a 5-year-old asking for a trebuchet? And two, it's just like, so like, well, I'm glad I know what a trebuchet is, because that makes good Forest School, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Have to go away and learn, as much as the kids know about something that they want to chat to you about. You're like, okay, I don't know anything about that.
Well, I feel like you end up like building a library of experiences just because as people come through, Forest School isn't the only thing they do. So it's almost like ships passing through, and it's like, oh, that person was really into like ballet, and I have picked up like, and I say person, I mean child, but what I mean is like, they came to Forest School for 6 months, and my understanding of ballet has increased because we did that. Or
absolutely, Disney princesses,
families come through. Oh, blood! Paw Patrol. Jesus.
Paw Patrol, loads of knowledge about Paw Patrol. And do you remember when that child brought in loads of artifacts and gave us like a museum talk? Do you remember that?
Yes. Do you remember?
And mostly First World War artifacts, I think. And we were like, okay, great. Yep, take over. Go for your life.
Do you remember when we had a savannah cat brought in?
Yes,
like
I do. I was looking at that photo the other day.
For people that haven't seen it, this thing is like a dog. Like it's on a lead. It's the size of like, how big would you say it was? It was big for a cat. It was like twice the size of a domestic cat. And they were just like, oh, this is what the family do. They breed cats and they're into cats. And they were just like, do you want to bring one in? So, savannah cats were Forest School that day.
Yeah.
I'm just talking around. So you came up with we were going to talk about something else. We were going to talk about Hygge, and then you broadened it.
Yeah, I kind of felt like they were connected, but I don't think that you did. But
well, we'll see, won't we?
It may come into it a bit.
At the end of this, we'll see why I was right. So, how would you describe it?
Well, I wanted to talk about building communities. We were thinking about Hygge, and I was doing some reading about Hygge, and so you wanted to kind of do like Hygge versus hardcore, like talking about how would you summarize that? Your thoughts?
Well, I was thinking that there's quite an interesting dichotomy, particularly for people who have a permanent site, but also for people that bring stuff in terms of what do we do physically to bring in sort of like home comforts, I guess you call them. How much time have you spent in making a particularly nice chair for you to sit in during sessions, or how much time have you put in like I know several people who've invested in those lovely, is it Petromax kettles? Kettles.
Oh yeah.
People who are like, I've got to have a lovely kettle, versus that kind of like what is probably the perception of Forest School, which is out in a cagoule in like 40-mile-an-hour wind with icicles hanging off your eyelashes and being like, we're hardcore and we're braving the weather. And you can kind of, it's almost a needle that can flip both ways. You can sometimes go, it was very creature comforty today. We're in some lovely hammocks and it's nice because we've got all these pots and pans, which means we could cook whatever we want. And then you realize that you've built too many shelters and you don't actually create anything new because you've got this lovely, it's almost like the goal of bushcraft is to make yourself very comfortable.
Like Ray Mears being fat.
A fat survivalist. The fat survivalist meme is very pertinent.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was kind of interesting. How do we know when we've made something too comfortable, or do we lose something by being comfortable, especially when you have a fluctuating group? I think it's different if you have if you are sort of homesteading, if you like. The idea in my head is that you arrive on like a barren patch of land or in a woodland or whatever, and when you've been there 20 years, your life is so much more comfortable, but you've made it all for you or for your family, and you accumulate like an easier life.
Wow. Yeah, you're basically talking about the human race. You're talking about the history of the human race there.
Well, that's what I mean.
But
we have fluctuating groups. So we have children that arrive and they have never seen the site without nice log seating and wind breaks for when it's windy, that stuff. And you go, have they missed an opportunity by not having some hardship?
Yeah, or an appreciation of the process of making those things. It's just like, they just magically appeared. They're just there. They don't think about the human labor and sort of ingenuity that's gone into making them. Do you think this is why
some parents think their children are ungrateful, because they've made their children's lives they don't, it's like, oh, well, it's the Monty Python, isn't it? We used to get up 3 hours before we went to bed and we'd walk 16 hours to school.
Yeah.
It's that
I
thing,
think what you're
isn't it?
talking about is like quite profound, because it is that transition from, you haven't read Sapiens, have you? Sapiens?
It's on my list. I got my Audible credits today.
Okay, yeah, you should read it. I mean, I had to stop because I got too depressed, but it's about that process of, it is anyway, changing from being hunter-gatherer, nomadic people into settling down, and then all the stuff that comes along with that. So, and then he basically says that wheat starts farming us rather than the other way around, and then you become, less and less happy. How they measure happiness of, like, nomadic hunter-gatherer people, I don't know. But he kind of examines that whole thing of like, oh yeah, loads of them died from starvation and disease and all the rest of it, but they got to do what they wanted the whole time. They didn't have to go out and like water the wheat at a certain time and go out and harvest the wheat at a certain time of year. Like, they had complete control over their lives and the kind of balance of happiness that might give you. And then, yeah. And you should read Overstory by Richard Powers as well, which is a fiction book about trees.
Yes, you recommended that one.
Yeah, and I'm just coming to the end of that, and that is also about that. It's kind of like the whole world is now sort of being farmed to keep one species alive. It's like,
have you heard the idea that we are the only species that have selectively bred ourselves?
Ooh, no.
In that, this idea that broadly speaking, the empathy and compassion it sort of is on almost a linear rise through a lot of society, in terms of like how much gore do you do, how much aggression do you do, all these things. And there's this idea that as you get civilizations and societies, they self-select for people who can work better, who are less aggressive, have more children. So then you have better, have more stable income, so they have more children. So then they're a bit like breeding the foxes down. You are always selecting the most infantile one. And they're saying that some people think that humans have bred ourselves to be more infantile, that we have made our infancy last, well, if you ask some people, 30 years, before we're ready to do stuff, because we've chosen longer learning and creative learning over deer that can fall out of their mum and be running in 5 minutes.
Yeah, Steven Pinker.
And that kind of pulls it, that kind of idea of community and civilization kind of ties in, because we wanted to talk about building communities.
Yes, and the reason that I kind of hit upon it, partly it's, very necessary now, but also in reading about Hygge, I came across this paragraph which says, the most important social relationships are close relationships in which you experience things together with others and experience being understood, where you share your thoughts and feelings and both give and receive support. In one word, Hygge. So I think when we were beginning to talk about Hygge in this podcast, then as you explained, we were talking about kind of creature comforts. But then I started reading about, okay, well, what actually is Hygge? And I'll read like definitions about it. And it seemed to say that actually Hygge was about the people rather than the things. And I thought that was really interesting. And thinking about how we create community at Forest School in the sessions that we do, in what we add to those sessions and what we prepare. Obviously, a lot of it is going to happen sort of almost naturally. If you're doing Forest School well, then it is going to happen pretty organically through the kind of long-term nature of Forest School in the same place. So you're going to be building those relationships between the same group of people all the time, same place, long-term. It's probably going to happen. But I would say if you reflect on our practice over the last however many years, there are definitely things that we have kind of either picked up subliminally or consciously to go, well, we'll do this because we know that it helps bond that group together.
Applications for Forest School training are now open at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I do. I think that's one of the first things I would say about community building is that it's one of many things about this sort of human condition that it is glaringly obvious when it is contrived. So if I think about possibly it's just the business circles that some, I listen to business books and stuff, and if you use the phrase like building communities, what that means to some people is like reviews and building a customer base and having people shout from the rooftops about your product and making them loyal to Apple and not Microsoft or using whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see that stuff happening and you can see people sort of pitching to be like, hey, you want to be part of our community, it's really like sticky. No, I don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it. So it is a fine line to tread between intentionally going and overtly saying we are community building, but without it coming across as like culty or needy or insincere. Because the other one that I think sometimes I feel like we tread that line between is we are a small business, and community, a loyal community, is really good for a small business to have.
Yeah.
But if you think about it in that way, if you approach everything from that perspective, then you're not being genuine. You're not actually going to get anything from it, and I think people will see through it very quickly.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, as you say, it's got to be genuine, hasn't it? So I've been to, I think you have as well, either with me or separately, to various kind of training days or things out in the woods or in other places, and some leaders and facilitators will do certain things throughout the course of the day, which definitely have the aim of like bonding a group, but are quite like out there and sort of make you feel a bit on edge. I can't think of a specific example, but do you know what I mean? We're going to go around the circle and we're going to like do something like, rather than just say our name and who we are, we're going to do something a little bit more weird, a bit more that makes you a bit vulnerable. Or
everyone has had that experience of a really bad icebreaker at a training day, a really contrived. I once did an interview. Actually, it was an interview for the job that I ended up getting, and the first question they asked us was like, they gave us all random cards with an occupation on it. So it was like one person was a doctor, one person was a lawyer, someone was an advertising manager, all this stuff. And then they said, you're all in a hot air balloon and it's about to crash into a mountain. If one of you jumps out or gets pushed out, then the air balloon is going to go up and go over the mountain. So we want you to like.
It's a great community building exercise.
It was like, think on your feet and think
opposite.
about why should your person be saved? And so I was like, I'm here for a teaching job. Like, give me a book to mark or something. But it's that thing, isn't it? Of they don't actually care what the answer is. They've just been told that you need to do something different to build whatever. And that also, I think what that is, that boils down to people trying to cheat the time.
Yes, I was going to say that. So it's like forcing it through it's like forcing like a massive globby mixture through a tiny like icing nozzle, isn't it? It's kind of like everyone go through this hole right now, and some people I was going to say that
image.
That's what it was in my head. Sorry, lockdown's made me feel very like my brain kind of spins off in imagination world quite easily. But I think for some people it is really natural to do those kind of slightly, I don't know what the word would be, like slightly more out there kind of group building things. I wouldn't say it comes naturally to us. I think we're quite like not like that. And so we don't.
Just as a reference, people listening, right? When we go to like gatherings, or if we see you at the FSA conference or something like that, like don't get us to do stuff. All right, you've been.
I kind of what I kind of mean more like is I actually don't really mind doing it that much, but I could not sit there and ask people to do it because it doesn't come naturally to me. Like I don't mind giving it a go. Like I went to drama school for God's sake. Like we were rolling around on the floor pretending to be a sea monster or pretending to be in the womb and things like that. Like I don't mind doing it, but because it doesn't come naturally to me to go, right, everybody do this thing. And actually, I was just thinking about, we've kind of played a lot with how we lead reflection in our sessions, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember when we were leading reflection in a certain way, or facilitating reflection, and it just really wasn't working? Do you remember when we used to kind of go round and it was more like kind of everyone sort of took turns, and they had those like name cookies that they put in the bucket?
Oh yeah.
And it was like, you could just see people squirming, and we were like, and that was a case where we really did believe in it. Like I really was up for sitting there and going, okay, let's talk about what we're grateful for or whatever. I wasn't pretending, I wasn't forcing that as a way to like build community, but it didn't work for them, and so we sort of stopped doing it in that way, didn't we?
I think what it is I mean, this might be true of just applying to those reflection things, but I think it's also true of any of these icebreaker sort of community force. I'm going to call them community forcing things. Is that often with the best will in the world, they neglect to think about the fact that there is a performance element in what you're doing. And I don't mean performance in terms of like holding up a skull and to be or not to be. I mean that when you're doing reflections, you're going around the circle, innately for people that we are with normally would be uncomfortable if they were about to say something and the person before them said the thing.
Oh yeah, completely.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's no reason for that other than, oh, there's a performance thing. I've got to show that I reflected in some unique snowflake. My reflections are the most perfect way. And if if I just say what they said, then they'll think I'm copying them, and they'll think, all of that is so counter to building a community, because what you're doing is and the same with these icebreaker things, is you're just zeroing in on all the anxiety of everyone else in the room is having a little moment to judge you and assess you. And, it's almost like, here's your first impression, go. And you're like, oh, that's not what I want to do. Or this hasn't, this icebreaker hasn't shown off a thing that I'm actually interested in, or this isn't how I engage with people. Whereas if you don't force anything, and you just give it a bit of time to work out how a community works and how the people in that community work, because it only works if all the cogs are different. It doesn't work the same. And so you might go, that child works well, is going to reflect well, or is going to be proud when they bring in all their World War I artifacts and they tell us all about them. But for another child to stand up and like do show and tell would be, I can think of some girls that used to come to us who, if you asked them to stand up and do show and tell in front of everyone, would be absolutely like anxiety ridden.
Support the podcast today by becoming a Patreon member at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
Yeah, completely. I was thinking about our parent and toddler groups and how we know that they have built communities, because there are now friendships within those families that didn't exist before, and the friendships go beyond us and beyond the group, which I always find like completely amazing and surprising. When you see people talking and then you realize that they've like met up loads of times since you last saw them, and you have no knowledge of that, and they've just taken this relationship that they've made at your session and gone off. It's completely natural, of course, but I still find it really lovely that people do that.
It's the difference between having colleagues and having work friends, in that you might have colleagues at a group where you're like, oh, we all go to the same toddler group, but if you go to the park with them afterwards, those are the ones that you're friends with.
Yeah. And the way that we do start each session with a circle time, don't we, usually? And I think it's a really simple thing, but I think it's really important the way that we often start a new group, or if there's more than one family that's new, and we get always at the start of a new half term or whatever, and rather than getting into anything kind of deep or meaningful to talk about in the beginning, it's like, let's go around with our names and where we live, because that is like, it requires it's really soft. It doesn't well, obviously there may be a bit of anxiety in speaking in front of groups. That may be really difficult for some people, but it's a pretty easy thing to say. It doesn't really connote anything. If you say you live in a certain place, it's, you know, where we live anyway. There might be different in other parts of the world.
But not when that kid recites their full address and postcode. And where you go around and it's like, oh, we live in Tiverton, or we live in Comstock, and I live at number 452.
But that always happens, and then that also breaks the ice, doesn't it? Because everyone laughs. But then you often, I always think, you know, if it turns out that somebody lives really close to you, like across the circle, immediately you're like, oh, okay, they live really near me. Like, you know, you're already finding kind of connections between a bunch of people that have never met before. And it's one of those things that's just very, very simple, but I think has a deeper effect, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I think it ties to one of the notes that you've made in the, I'm going to call them show notes because it sounds professional. In the show notes, you've asked about schools and said, how do schools build community and assemblies and school themes and stuff? And I realised, as you were saying, as we were talking about the circle, and that the Forest School community works as a web. It is three-dimensional. Everyone is hopefully as connected. You know, I would say there's probably, hopefully, more strong connections from the families to us, but that's because we are facilitating. They hear our voices a bit more, but not significantly more. Whereas a school assembly is so didactic, isn't it? To the point where my experience of assemblies is that any attempt to connect laterally with the people around you is immediately greeted with like a click of the fingers and I'm watching you, how dare you interrupt our glorious Lord and head teacher, Mrs. whatever. So is that a community? If the definition of community is being understood or accepted in some ways. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of definition of Hygge, wasn't it? But I think what a school is trying to aim for there is a shared experience that goes beyond the classroom. So what they're aiming for is, we are not just class 1B with Mrs. Jones. We are part of a school cohort, a school community, and so therefore we are going to try and have some shared experiences, like assembly, like singing together, if schools still do that.
Do you know what,
like
though?
sports day, all of those kind of things. Like, is that what they're driving towards, and like why? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think that has the intended effect, but not through the method that they intend. At least for my classes, because there is that. What is the word? It's not Stockholm, but you know, like the military is very famous for like making everybody suffer together, because suffering bonds you together as a unit, because you have had experienced hardship. And to a small degree, I would say that is how I made a community with my class, was that we would all roll our eyes and go, it's 3:00, we got to go in for assembly. And they'd all go, oh, and I'd go, I know, we've all got to grin and bear it, right? We're all in it together. I was never the teacher that would like sing the party line and be like, come on guys, it's great, we're going to sing at the piano. That
was like me in uniform. So schools would argue as well that that's one of the reasons for uniform, isn't it? To build a school community, to build a school identity, to feel like we're all on the same team. And actually doing it that way and repressing and then forcing teachers to be the kind of guards of that, you know, it's like, if you have to flipping enforce it, then it isn't building community, is it?
That's how you define a cult, isn't it? In a cult, if you know, the difference between, I always think between, so there is a reasonably famous cult not far away from where we live, and they're not dissimilar in sort of practice to some Amish communities in terms of just like wanting to live off the land, wanting to live in an older way of life, blah blah blah. But the Amish have their Rumspringa, and they're very like, you can go, you know what Rumspringa is?
No.
Oh, so Rumspringa is, I think it's 6 months or a year, where when they're 17, they're just allowed to go, and they're just allowed to go out in the world. And then after that, they have to decide if they're going to come back and be Amish forever, or they're like, actually, I've decided I'm not Amish anymore. And to be confident in your community is to go, you can experience other things. You know, this is not dogmatic. This is not anything else. Whereas culty things are no. You don't question the things. You don't.
Yeah, And it's interesting. Like, I was just thinking of going back to assemblies a little bit about, linking onto that. I'm not necessarily sure that like assemblies are always bad. It's just that I've worked in 2 schools which enforced dead silence, walking through the corridors, sitting in the chairs, absolute dead silence, and you were told off if you spoke.
As is proper and correct.
And I worked in one school where you just came into assembly however you wanted to come into assembly, and it was the first thing you did. You arrived at school and you came in, and then the head teacher would always, even if they weren't leading the assembly, he would just walk on stage and just press play on a music video, or a piece of music basically. And it would usually be something that the kids weren't that familiar with. So once he just pressed, this is an all boys school by the way, all boys secondary school, he just presses play on Kate Bush doing Wuthering Heights. And everyone's just silent, and everyone just watches Kate Bush, and then he like explains a bit about who she is and the fact that she was like 15 when she wrote that song, and some of you guys are 15, and that's cool, isn't it? And like that was a kind of way of, and he was cool. It was like everyone wanted to be quiet because they wanted to listen to the music, and they did kind of think about it. There were some kind of challenging bits of music there sometimes, and he never had to say, everyone shut up now and listen to me. People wanted to listen, and it would be the kind of thing where they would then talk about it throughout the school day. So you might meet your tutor group later and it would come up in conversation, or you'd then teach a year 10 English class and they'd talk about it, and so would a year 7 drama class. You know what I mean? So in that way, that kind of shared experience that people were interested in did build community, because it all felt like, oh, we were all there, weren't we? And what did you think about that? They were kind of more challenging assemblies. They were sort of thought-provoking.
Do you think it ties in with our it's a few podcasts ago now, the storytelling animal, and we touched on, in that one, we touched upon the idea that you needed to have stories, but in this example I'm gonna say shared experiences, in order to shortcut understanding how other people in your community will act. So is it a way of shorthanding your community to say having a shared experience? It's a bit like being British means you don't need to worry that you can talk to someone about the weather, or you can talk to someone about like what a tool certain person in the government is, right? There's very little class divide in that. There's very little education divide in that, as that would be part of like British community is we all think our government is ridiculous. We all think the weather is interesting, stuff like that. That's shorthand, isn't it? And having those little shorthands. And I also wonder if it ties into like routine. Is routine necessary for community building, or is it just useful?
I don't know, but I was thinking about, as you were talking, thinking about shared experience and stories. And I think I'm sure we've spoken about this before, but with our long-term groups, when there's like a remarkable day because, for example, it doesn't stop raining, or I'm trying to think about like those days that are memorable for a particular group, like something happens like that then is spoken about, and so then the group will go, oh, do you remember
do you remember when the tree fell down? It didn't make any noise.
The tree fell down, it didn't make any noise. And so that's a shared experience. And it's almost, I wonder whether it's like practical shared experience bonds a group together.
Well, it's not contrived.
You don't get in school. It's not contrived. It just happens. And in school, you have to kind of like invent that, and you have to make it happen as a teacher. But in Forest School, stuff just happens, and you physically live it. You don't just sit there and listen to a story about it, although sometimes you do. But then it kind of becomes part of the group memory and the group story, like the story of that community. We started, and when we started it was like this, and then this thing happened, and then this thing happened, and then you joined, didn't you? And then, you know what I mean? There's kind of, they could tell their own story.
They could. I was also thinking that those shared experiences, contrary to if we're going back to things like assemblies and icebreakers and whatever else, those are very flat experiences in terms of like they are normally purely academic or verbal. There's, I don't know many where it's like get up out of your chair or something, but shared experiences at Forest School come with a smell, they come with a tactile sensation, they come with an emotional context because you were with someone that you were talking to, or you got to jump up and down on it, or you remember that feeling of it raining all day and just being sweaty inside of waterproofs, and that sort of stuff they're more powerful memories. And so maybe they are, maybe an assembly is a very low dose of shared experience, and Forest School is a full whacking chemotherapy knock you for six shared experience.
Absolutely. Well, especially if you add play into the mix. You've written a thing in the show notes about role play, building community, and I absolutely agree. Like, you've said is, engaging in role play with another person.
Well, so you mentioned that one of the things about community is that a community begins when its mission. A community begins its mission when its members decide to start collaborating towards a common purpose, which I thought, yes, I 100% get that. So Forest School is our common purpose, or being members of Buckingham Primary is our purpose. But then that's not really a purpose, is it? That's just a thing. But what I was wondering was, do imaginative and role play missions also build a community? Does it have to be a real purpose of like, we have planted 60 trees in our local area, or can it be we fought all those imaginary
completely, because the children talk about those experiences as if they were real. Do you know what I mean? They will say, you will overhear children say, do you remember when we played that thing where you pretended to be the tree and then we buried your feet? Like, they will talk about that more than once, even if it happened a long time ago, as much as they would talk about the tree fell down in the real world. Remember when you were the ogre? Remember, in fact, a group member did say, do you remember when Catherine was the queen and and I was like, whoa, yeah. And that was like us as adults, as leaders, engaging in role play and kind of using it as a springboard for the kids. And I was like, whoa, yeah, I hadn't thought about that for ages. But she was the queen, and the queen came to visit.
She was 100% the queen.
It was so good.
But that was so community building, because we all just got on board with that role play. Everyone just went 110% like, right, I'm gonna bow when she comes in, I'm gonna pretend to clean the table, I'm gonna, everyone was 100% invested in what was happening.
Yeah.
And you couldn't have done that in a contrived way. And I think that's where for us, it's like child-led or learner-led. But in terms of a community, you expand that up to include, the parents in a family, or the whatever else in the family, and you go, that you are going to get so much more buy-in if you are just open and honest. And it sounds really cheesy to be like, people feel valued, people feel heard, but that is what it is.
That is what it is.
There's not.
I was just thinking about. Yeah, I was thinking about. So we've just decided to close part of our business, haven't we? We've just decided that our kindergarten is closed now, and I was just thinking about that kind of community. I mean, it's not ending, because we are still, those families are still able, hopefully, when all this is a little bit more chill, to come to our sessions and to keep a relationship going with us. But just thinking about our kind of exchanges of words between those families and the things that we've said to one another, and it being that kind of like, this is really sad, it's coming to an end, we'll take all these memories with us, but we'll hope that, we'll stay in touch with each other. And some of the things that the families have said to us, I can't imagine, or maybe they do, I don't know, but I've never had parents when I was a teacher saying things like that to me, where you think, it's a massive part of their lives in a kind of personal and emotional way. Like, even teachers of my own children,
it's not just a business contract. It's not just a business relationship has ended. It's a like, I mean, I could be overstating it, but for some of them, it feels like they have written a thing and saying, it's almost like Auntie Gemma and Uncle Lewis are emigrating. It's that level that you might just go, someone, I'm not going to big shot it and say we're part of their families, but like someone that you're very close to is not going to be in your lives as much. And
I think it also like goes beyond you and I. It's kind of like this experience was, even if it was only once a week, it was so impactful on, you know, it was obviously very important to them, that experience, which is like very humbling that you've, you know, been able to kind of facilitate that and brought those people together. I was thinking about, like, we're kind of talking about how to build communities, but why it's important in the first place, like, and when I first was reading about adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, if you find out your ACE score and do your ACE survey, you often find that after that there are some other kind of surveys and things to read about that resilience to that. So just because you may have had a childhood full of ACEs doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to have all these negative experiences afterwards. So for those who don't know what ACEs are, but some studies have discovered that if you have a certain amount of ACEs, then you may end up having, you know, even medical problems when you're older, as well as other kind of issues going on. But in part of that kind of resilience stuff, there are some sentences about, you know, you were part of a community, you had other adults or mentors or people in your life who cared about you.
It's the attachment theory stuff, isn't it?
You. Yeah, and yeah, you could call that school, but in this ACEs stuff, it doesn't call it school. It says what's important is you had people in your life who were older than you, who cared about how you were doing in school. So it doesn't say you had a great school experience. It's like, no, beyond that, if you just give that as a given, like everyone goes to school in this, you know, example, you had some people around you who weren't your parents, who really cared and listened to you, and how, like, absolutely important that is. And I don't think that's important just for children and young people. I think that is really important for adults as well. And where else, you know, if you think about a forest school session, like, where else, even as an adult, as a parent, are you going to go to something like that where you are just valued as a person and as part of that community, and you're listened to and you get to play and you get to share an experience? Like, there isn't actually anywhere I can think of right now.
Well, it's made me have two thoughts there. One is that we may be in a unique position as adults and mentors, maybe, in that for lots of other people, they have a product or an outcome that they need to deliver. You know, they need to deliver X weeks of football training, or X weeks of you know, literacy skills, or I've got to get you through your stats or whatever. But for us, listening to a child talk about their breakfast is part of forest school, just as much as firelighting is, right?
Yeah.
And that is not going to sit, that might not be intuitive when you think about what is forest school, but listening to someone talk about their breakfast is part of relationship building, and therefore is part of forest school. Listening to someone talk about their sister's play that they're going to be in, and what, you know, what color the tickets are, and the way they've got to wear their new shoes, is part of forest school. And we don't have to be there thinking in the back of our heads, this is lovely, but really we've got to get on with that spelling test, or you know, actually we've got to deliver X, you know, I'm really here just to see you kick a ball around, mate. It's forest school is authentic in that you are valued in a three-dimensional way. And then the second part that it made me think of was it made me think about some of the Eckhart Tolle stuff, because you mentioned like identity. And so Eckhart Tolle, some of his work is about the ego, because your ego isn't a physical thing, it's just a bit of your brain wiring. And so it attaches itself to identities wherever it can. I am a Liverpool supporter, I am a man, I am a Briton, I am a whatever. And that is how it then defines itself as people that are in your group and people that aren't in your group, and what those things mean. And then having those things stripped away is really painful, because you realize it didn't mean anything. But if I think about other communities, and off the top of my head, if I take brownies or football coach or something like that, the identity of I am someone that does football comes with it, and football looks like this. The goal is to do this, and you kick it like that. And we always start with training like this. Or brownies might be, we always do the promise, and there's always a craft like this, and the thingy always does it like this. Forest school could be, I don't know, but I hope someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but perhaps is unique in that you build an identity of doing forest school, and but there's no prerequisite of what that is outside of like we're in the woods. You wouldn't say, but forest school, as we were saying before we started recording, if the kids are into castles, forest school is castles. If the kids are into ballet, forest school is ballet. If they, and it flits from week to week. Sometimes it's about building, sometimes it's about cooking, sometimes it's about role playing, sometimes it's about stories, sometimes it's about going on a 2-hour walk and getting absolutely knackered. You are being valued as a person, because you can't just be valued for one physical
thing. I think that's it. And I think the way you just were talking about, if you do start talking about something that you're interested in and you need to talk about right now, in other settings, there is always that thing in the facilitator's mind of, that's really great, I'm really here, interested in what you've got to say, but we've got to get on, but we've got to get on with brownies, and I've got 30 children here, and I've got to make sure that they're all happy, and be quiet now. And even with adults, like, I'm trying to think about some other kind of situations, apart from obviously being with friends, like some other situations where I've been as an adult where I felt part of a community, and genuinely valued like that. And they're all sort of things that come to an end. They're not ongoing things. It'll be like a project that I've worked on, or a group that I've been to, like about parenting. It's like, there's like a free parenting thing after school, and you can go and like just chat about parenting, and then there'll be some thoughts from the facilitator or whatever. And you have to kind of make yourself quite vulnerable in those situations and do a lot of talking, and you're valued and listened to, and you are building a community there. But it's always like, this is as you say, this is a 10-week program, and then that's just it. And however hard you try, even if you're say to other people in the group, let's definitely like meet up once a week for coffee, you don't, because there isn't that designated time and place, and the facilitator doing it as their job and making space for it in your life. So if you've got that kind of like, it's Friday morning or it's all day Thursday, that's what I do for the foreseeable future. I think some people have in the past, like, who haven't, like potential people that would come to our sessions have messaged us and gone, I'm really interested in like my child coming to your forest school course. Do you remember that? Like just occasionally, and you're like, it's not a course. It's just a way of life, man. It's a way of life. One of the notes I also made was about like nature connection and building a community. So this is more out there, like building a community with other living things. So, and I think the reason that this was in my mind is because I did a survey for somebody yesterday. No one I knew, just somebody was doing some forest school research and wanted some survey responses. And there were quite a lot of questions in there, that you had to go like agree strongly, disagree, whatever. And quite a lot of the questions in there were like, I feel like I'm just one living thing and part of all living things on planet Earth, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you agree with that? And I was like, well, these are quite interesting. Like, I'm really intrigued by the research, because like some of the questions were about, children should always hold hands when they're off the school premises. Agree? Strongly agree? Blah, blah, blah. And then it went on to this like nature connection stuff. Anyway, so I wish her well with this research, and I'm interested to see what it is all about. But and I was wondering how much forest school sort of aim or consequence is that we might feel a bit more part of the planet, and a bit less human, and a bit more animal, and a bit more level playing field with the trees in that space, the woodlife in that space, and building that community. I think we've spoken about that before.
There's a sense of I can't think what the word is. It's not giving up, and it's not ambivalence, but there's a sense of like you just have to let some stuff go when you are outside, in a way that lots of other communities you can't. If a project doesn't go through in a job, normally you can nail it down to one person or a team that didn't pull their weight, or that their bus wasn't in the right place at the right time, or they didn't file that, or you go broader than that, and you go, well, the government's been underfunding that, and so that's why this thing hasn't happened. And you can kind of blame a lot of misfortune on a person. But when you are outside, and I mean, the first thing that comes to my head when you were saying it was like the weather is like, when there is adverse weather, I get the feeling that, like, one, I can't blame anybody for it. I mean, I could blame the boomer generation for like carbon footprinting. Thank you very much. But outside of that, do you know what I mean? You can't pin that on anybody, and so you just go, okay, we're all experiencing this. There's nobody to throw this at. And when I say we're all experiencing that, when you are outside and, like, particularly like wind, if you can see the brambles and the ferns also getting absolutely battered by the wind, there's a weird empathy there, because they don't have, as far as I'm aware, the structures of plants means that all their individual cells are doing their all individual things. They don't have a central nervous system, right? But you do have this weird empathy of like, God, the wind is really strong today, and you see that conifer absolutely bending at the top, and you go, oh, that looks painful, or that looks, the being outside in, I guess it is that thing, isn't it? That army thing of, you're bonded through adverse conditions, but you're bonded with, for me, I would say a lot of my nature connection is, and then that feeds into my like, having survived a winter because it's really hard here, and then, like, so there's some hazel saplings, up near where the big swing is. So those little hazel saplings I have a weird attachment to, because I put them in like a November. We all had this horrible winter, and now whenever as they're growing and people are stepping near them, I'm like, no, you don't know what we've been through. Me and these hazels, man, right? We've got a thing. We're tougher than, it's that thing, isn't it?
Find out about CPD courses at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
Yeah, I think there's also something about like sharing the space. So the kind of like nature awareness that you might talk about with children, where you might just talk aloud your thoughts and go, well, we are going to put those creatures back where we found them because blah, blah, blah. And we're not going to trample all of that understory there, because the mice live here. Like, we've seen them. Do you remember we saw them the other day? Do you remember we walked past and we heard them squeaking? They live here. They live here all the time. So we're not going to do that. And so, because it's always in the same place, I think that kind of emphasizes the community feeling between the animals and creatures that live there. Because that wouldn't happen, is what I'm saying. If you were in a different woodland or a different outdoor environment each time, you wouldn't necessarily have that kind of like, oh, that's the mouse's home and they live here and they're always here.
I would counter that, though. I think you would have I think it would take longer to develop. There's no arbitrary level of connection, right? But I think let's imagine there is for a second. I think if you went to a different woodland, or you had, say, 5-6 woodlands you went to, and maybe people who are listening who have 5 or 6 spots they work in can speak to this, but I think it would take you longer to build the same level of nature connection. But when you got it, you would have a much broader and more wide-ranging view of, because we are in our 1 3-acre site, we are fixed to this location. We have this, it goes very deep, our connection with this one place. But I wonder if you went to lots of places, if you would have a connection with conifers generally. And so you could go anywhere and feel connected to conifers. If I go to a different woodland, I don't feel as connected to it. But someone who goes to lots of woodland might feel connected to British woodland, or they might feel connected to, like, Nordic trees, or they might.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, definitely. I guess kind of what I was also thinking about was, especially if you're beginning your nature connection journey. So the horntails that live in our woods.
Mm.
So like wasps, but with long tails, look really scary, but really beautiful. When they are, well, you only ever see one at a time, right? Don't you? Laying her eggs with her ovipositor on some wood, pretty amazing. But she has, for me and for the children, I think, like a personality, and she's kind of precious and special, like she's another person. You know, she's got that kind of like status of, we only see her in the summer months. It's almost like it's always the same wasp, but it isn't, obviously.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, whereas if you were just out on a walk and you saw that horntail, you'd be like, oh, it's a horntail. But for me, and I think the way that the kids speak about her is with that kind of respect and reverence, as if she was a member of the group. Almost more important, because she lives here all the time, and our actions can have huge impact on her.
Well, that ties into what I was just thinking, which was that one of the things that I think is definitely a thing of community is, and this applies to nature connection and also applies to like the social side of community, is like an unavoidance of the consequences. So if you are not part of a community, everything's throwaway. You know, everything is, you can be as narcissistic as you like, because fuck it, burn that, you know, utilize that for as much as you can, get what you can and go. But one of the things that it struck me is that my experience in teaching has made me think, and my working in small village schools is very different to my experience of, I'm only going to say visiting very large schools, and particularly even then secondary schools, because in a small village school where there are 20 children in your class, if you absolutely piss someone off, or you know, make the biggest social fumble, you know, and you do it in year 1, that child can then be ostracized until they get to year 6, year 7, and they go to secondary school. Do you know what I mean? Because the responsibilities are unavoidable, whereas and so that makes you play the game in a different way, I think. Whereas in a secondary school, I think there's a little bit more splitting around.
Although that's quite a pessimistic way of looking at it.
But there's the positive as well. The positive side of that, maybe I'm just viewing it in the negative side, because that's the worry that parents would come to you with. But the positive is that if you build a strong network, that network stays with you, and you know, good actions last a lot longer. Do you know what I mean? That they have value for longer. But equally, in a community, in terms of nature connection, trampling on stuff has an unavoidable consequence, and you can't skirt around it and be like, oh, it'll grow back, or oh, we'll just go to a different woodland, you know, or oh, we'll just squash that, you know. And the longer we are there in that space, the more we realize, like, that's why we're treading lightly.
Yeah, it's like the world in microcosm, isn't it? It's the world in microcosm, and lots of children obviously don't get that. Why would they? You know, they don't have that sort of, and lots of adults too, you know, that kind of, in fact, we've definitely had conversations with adults about, do you mind not doing that, because this is a woodland that's like alive. But, you know, like explain to a child, well, if we pick up all of the deadwood, then there won't be any more deadwood for quite a long time, and there won't be any more dry sticks. So if we just like burn it all for no reason, like what's the purpose of your fire? Like, why do you need to make it bigger right now? Those kind of conversations, and you kind of see this like, oh yeah, oh okay, and then you see the understanding begin to happen, and then them taking on that voice with other children and almost repeating these, you know, these thoughts back. I can't remember where I was going with this, but
it's a bit of resource scarcity, isn't it? And not even scarcity, but like resource valuing, and that you all as a community, maybe that's one of the other things of a community, is that you have a reasonably close value of items available to your community. It's no good if one person in the community views firewood as burn it all, doesn't matter, there's always going to be loads, and the other person says, and the rest of the group think, well, no, actually it's really precious because we, you know, there isn't going to be more, you know. It's that thing, isn't it? One of the things is valuing things the same way. And that is where a lot of children's disagreements come from. in terms of like group building projects is the value of this piece of rope, the value of the one ladder that we have, the one rope ladder, the value of this tarp, and it should go on this side. No, it should be the door. Well, it should be and negotiating that is then what makes you a community, because you can then go, we have decided that the best use of this tarp is a door, or the best use of,
Yeah.
And it kind of, do you think that Forest School is one of the things that doesn't create an us versus them in terms of community? Because that's almost an unavoidable of a community, as you are in or out. But is Forest School a community that you can always be in, as opposed to, being fixed? Is it growth mindset?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say when you're inside it, isn't it? I think when you're inside it, it does feel like us versus them. There are people that do not do Forest School who don't get it, or don't like it, or are not part of it. And you're like, okay, well, you're not one of us, one of us.
But what I think about what I mean when I say that it's a growth mindset kind of thing, is that a Forest School community is not we've talked about it being valuing resources and having routines and having shared experiences and all those things, but they're not set in stone. So it's not like, our Forest School community was strong 3 years ago, and it, say our Saturday group was strong 3 years ago. It's also strong today. They don't look the same.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? They're not like, this is, it's not that culty way of this is how we do it, and you do get it or you don't get it. You go, well, if you then become part of the community, it's this amorphous blob that will move to accommodate you, and so it will look different. Well,
you're part of it and you make it. Yeah, absolutely. And
football training will always look like football training. Brownies to some extent will always look like brownies. Yeah. But Forest School is this, and that's, again, we always say, don't we, that's what makes Forest School interesting for us as leaders, is that you are always adapting the group and always going, oh, it needs more reflection at the moment, it needs less reflection, it needs more gross motor, it needs more stories, it needs, do you know what I mean? It's like constantly testing a soup.
Yeah.
A soup that you never...
Yeah.
Soup.
And that's the proper meaning of community, though. That's what it is, isn't it? Like, you can't go, well, like, it might be an organisation that you belong to in those other ways of like, well, I have to take a test to get in, or I have to wear the uniform and I have to say the thing. Whereas this is community.
And not to be overly, I'm going to tread so lightly here. You ready for the smallest tippy toad you've ever seen?
Come on, tippy toes.
Tippy toes. There is some zeitgeisty stuff. We are in June of 2020. There is some zeitgeisty stuff happening in the world about communities and people, and who's in a community and who's not in a community, and how those people are. And I think a lot of this possibly stems from people having an idea that a community is a fixed entity. They were happy at a certain point in time, or with a certain group of people, or with a certain way of doing things. And then rather than doing that Forest School, okay, there's new people in the community. What does it look like now? It's like, no, if it doesn't look like it did at point X, then I don't like it and I will not accept it. And I will, fight tooth and nail to get back to what I think, when I think the community was best, rather than going, this is the community, the community is the people who are there at this point. They come in, they come out. It's a bit like a river, isn't it? And taking just one point in the river and going, the water's always just going through it, and it'll change and it'll move. Was that light enough? Did I tiptoe around it?
You were Timmy Tiptoes.
Okay.
In the extreme there.
Nobody knows what I was talking about.
I
Nobody
know.
knows at all. Everybody knows. Of course, we all know the world's on fire and covered in viruses.
People are dying, man. They're dying.
It's not good. We need more community. We need more positive community and flexible community and adaptive community. And that's what's going to save us. That's what's going to get us through, isn't it? There's no room anymore for rigidity and, just...
There should be jobs. Okay, right, get me. So if we're saying Forest School is so incredible because it's community, and what allows it to be that way is all the things we've talked about. So not forcing it and listening to people, letting them be themselves and being adaptable, but also giving it time, and it has a facilitator or two and a place. It's not just something you hope will happen. You actually make space for it. So why are there not jobs for people to do that? I'm not talking about like a mayor or a councillor or that kind of thing. Can you imagine if there was like a job of like community builder, and it had a way?
Head teacher, because I'm going to tell you the best way of doing it. That's not.
No, but what if it isn't?
Community works when everybody has a voice and everybody. But if you don't feel like your voice is heard, then it isn't going to work. I think that's one of the things.
I'm imagining a future though, man. Like parish councils are kind of the nearest thing that we have around here to that kind of thing, where if you're on the parish council, you're talking about local stuff and everyone gets listened to, and then you all make a decision together. And people can go to those meetings if they want to, but who really goes? Like people who don't want their next door neighbour to build an extension. Like they're the only people that go. Whereas if it was a thing, if it was just a given that there was a person they're not a head teacher, they're not telling people how to do things, they are properly trained, they're a community builder, that's their job, and that every month or couple of months or whatever, there is a forum, there is space, or they work with lots of different groups in the community and then kind of compile those ideas. A bit like I guess a therapist or a coach, somebody who just listens, collates.
Community coach. Here we go.
All of that, yeah. I just wonder what effect that would.
You heard it here first. When it's in the 2030 manifesto, Southerton 2030.
Come on, Keir Starmer. I'm going to ring him up. I'm going to call him.
Tell him you want to be a community coach.
Yeah, this is the answer to the problems of the world.
Shall we? Are you happy to talk about? I'm going to mouth the book. That book that we both said we would read. I have nearly finished it.
Cool.
Are you anywhere near? Yeah?
Yeah.
So next podcast we'll talk about the book Feral.
By George Monbiot.
Which is, I'm thoroughly enjoying it as a book.
Oh, cool.
So it's quite a meaty book. But if you have Audible credits, or you think, I'm still off work, I'm going to get into something interesting. It's about sort of I would say, brief synopsis, it's like if you are interested or have read that book Rewilding,
Isabella Tree.
Wilding. It's the next book that you should read after that. And has some amazing ideas that we'll go into another time. But we'll leave it there.
Cool.
So.
Yeah.
Bye.